When the alien soldiers tried to take Cub, they hadn't expected humans to close ranks. Part 1. The Chorus 7 Trading Station floated in the darkness between three great stellar nations like a tiny island in an endless ocean of stars. It was not a beautiful place, and it was not a comfortable place, but it was home to thousands of beings from dozens of different worlds who had come here to trade and work and build new lives far from whatever troubles they had left behind. The station was old, and its metal walls groaned sometimes when the temperature changed, and the air always carried a faint smell of machine oil and recycled oxygen, but nobody complained because Chorus 7 offered something rare in the galaxy. It offered neutrality. Here, the laws of no single empire held complete power, and creatures who might be enemies on their home worlds learned to live as neighbors, because that was the only way anyone survived on the frontier among the many species who called the station home. There was a small community of humans who had settled on Deck 14. They numbered perhaps 200 souls, and they were a mixed group with nothing much in common except their species and their stubborn determination to make a life in this strange corner of space. There were merchants who sold earth goods to curious aliens, and mechanics who had discovered that human hands were surprisingly good at fixing machines built by other species. There was old Sergeant Vasquez, who had fought in 3 wars before deciding he was done with fighting, and had opened a small bar where he served drinks and listened to stories from anyone who needed someone to listen. There was Dr. Amara Okonkwo, who had come to the frontier to study alien biology and had stayed because she found she liked healing more than studying. And there was Mira Chun, who ran a repair shop on the lower level of Deck 14, and who had become the closest thing the human community had to a leader simply because she was the one who always showed up when there was a problem to solve. Myra was 34 years old, with short, dark hair and hands that were always marked with grease and small burns from her work. She had come to Chorus 7 6 years ago, running from memories of a failed marriage and a life on Earth that had felt too small and too suffocating. She had found peace in the simple work of fixing broken things, and she had found family in the small community of humans who looked out for each other in this place so far from home. But the center of her world now was a small alien child with soft golden fur and 4 slender arms and eyes the color of amber honey. The child's name was Cub. That was not the name she had been born with, but it was the name the humans had given her, and it was the only name she answered to now. Cub had arrived on Chorus 7 18 months ago in a battered escape pod that had drifted into the station's sensor range, broadcasting a weak distress signal. When the rescue team had opened the pod, they had found a tiny Velith girl barely 4 years old curled up in the emergency compartment. Surrounded by the bodies of her family, pirates had attacked her parents' trading vessel, and only the quick thinking of her dying mother, who had shoved her into the escape pod and launched it into the void, had saved her life. Station authorities had tried to find relatives who might take her, but no one came forward. They had contacted the Velith government, but received only bureaucratic silence in return. The child had nowhere to go and no one to claim hers. Oh, the humans of Deck 14 had done what humans have always done when they find a lost and frightened young creature. They had taken her in. It was not an official adoption because the tangled laws of 3 stellar nations made such things nearly impossible, and it was not something anyone had planned. It had simply happened the way natural things happen. Mira had been the one to coax the traumatized child out of the medical bay with patience and soft words and offerings of food. Mira had been the one to sit with her through the first terrible nights when she woke screaming from nightmares about fire and darkness and the faces of parents she would never see again, and somehow without anyone deciding it should be. So Myra had become Cub's mother in every way that mattered. But she was not alone in raising the child. The whole human community had embraced Cub as one of their own, in a way that would have seemed strange to outsiders, but felt completely natural to them. Sergeant Vasquez taught her to play chess and told her stories about Earth and its blue oceans and green forests, Dr. Okonkwo monitored her health and learned everything she could about Velith biology to make sure the child grew strong and healthy. The Reyes family, who lived 3 doors down from Mira, watched Cub whenever Mira had to work late, and their own children treated her as a sister. Young Tom Bradley, who worked in the station's hydroponics bay, brought her fresh fruit and taught her the names of all the plants. Even the gruff old miners who passed through the station would soften when they saw the small alien girl and would bring her small gifts and tell her she was the prettiest little creature they had ever seen. Cub learned to speak English with a slight lisp that everyone found adorable. She learned that humans liked to touch each other when they were happy or sad, and she learned to give hugs that wrapped all 4 of her arms around whoever needed comfort. She learned that human food was strange, but often delicious, especially the sweet brown paste called chocolate. She learned that humans sang songs when they were working and told jokes that did not always make sense and laughed at things that were not really funny. And she learned, most importantly, that these strange, soft creatures with only 2 arms and no fur would do anything to keep her safe. She did not know that she was special. She did not know that the blood in her veins carried genetic markers that certain powerful people in the galaxy considered valuable. She did not know that her parents had been running from something far worse than ordinary pirates. When they died, she knew only that she was loved and that Deck 14 was her home, and that the humans who surrounded her every day were her family. And for 18 months that had been enough. Myra stood in her workshop late one evening watching Cub sleep on the small cot in the corner, where she often napped while waiting for Mira to finish her work. The child's forearms were wrapped around a stuffed animal that one of the merchants had brought back from Earth, and her small chest rose and fell with peaceful breathing. Myra felt the fierce protective warmth that had become so familiar over these months, and she whispered a quiet promise into the recycled air of the station. "Nobody will ever hurt you again, little one, and I will make sure of that." She did not know that in 3 days her promise would be tested in ways she could not imagine. She did not know that soldiers were coming. She did not know that the galaxy was about to learn what happens when you threaten something that humans have decided to protect. All she knew was that she loved this child, and that love had made her part of something bigger than herself. Humans of Cora 7 did not know it yet, but they were about to show the galaxy something that many species had forgotten. They were about to show what humans do when someone tries to take one of their own. The Dominion cruiser appeared on the station's sensors without any warning on a morning that had started like every other morning on Cora 7. Mira had woken early and made breakfast for Cub and walked her to the small school that the station maintained for the children of various species. She had kissed the top of the child's furry head and told her to be good, and had gone to her workshop to begin the day's repairs. She was elbow deep in the broken engine core of a Palian shuttle when the first whispers began to spread through Deck 14. A warship had docked at the station. Not just any warship, but a cruiser bearing the black and crimson markings of the Kethari Dominion. The Kethari were one of the most feared species in the known galaxy, and their empire had been built on 3 centuries of conquest and subjugation. They were reptilian beings who stood nearly 7 feet tall, with scales that ranged from dark green to almost black and eyes that held no warmth or mercy. Their soldiers were legendary for their discipline and their brutality and their complete lack of hesitation. When ordered to kill, no one on Korath 7 could understand why such a vessel would come to their small and unimportant station. The answer became clear within the hour. 30 Kethari soldiers marched through the main corridors of the station in perfect formation, their heavy boots striking the metal floor in unison like a drumbeat of doom. Their plasma rifles were held at the ready position, and their eyes scanned every face they passed, as if searching for a target. At their head walked Commander Sithrak, a veteran of dozens of campaigns, whose scales were marked with the ritual scars that showed his high rank. He moved With the cold confidence of someone who had never known defeat and never expected to, the soldiers made their way to the station administrator's office, where a nervous Palian bureaucrat named Ven waited for them with trembling hands and a sick feeling in his stomach. Ven had held his position for 12 years and had dealt with many difficult situations, but he had never faced anything like this. Commander Sithric did not waste time on pleasantries. He placed a data tablet on the administrator's desk and spoke in a voice that was flat and cold and allowed for no argument. "We are here to collect Dominion property, and you will assist us, or you will be considered an obstacle to be removed." Ven looked at the documents on the tablet and felt his blood turned to ice. The documents concerned a Valith child who was believed to be living on this station. According to Dominion records, the child's parents had been debtors who had fled their illegal obligations to the Empire under Dominion law. Debt was hereditary, and the children of debtors became property of the state until the debt was paid. The child would be collected and transported to a Dominion processing facility where she would be assigned to labor appropriate to her species and age. Ven knew immediately which child the documents referred to. Everyone on the station knew about Cub, the little Velith girl who lived with the humans on Deck 14. He also knew that what the Dominion called a processing facility was in reality a place of horror where children were worked until they collapsed and discarded when they were no longer useful. Commander Ven said carefully, "This station exists in neutral space, and we have agreements with multiple stellar nations that must be respected, and I would need to verify these documents through proper channels." Before, Sithrak leaned forward and his yellow eyes fixed on the administrator with predatory intensity. "Let me be clear, and I will only say this once, so listen carefully," the commander said. "You have 2 hours to verify whatever you wish to verify, and at the end of those 2 hours, I will collect the child, and anyone who stands in my way will be shot, and their bodies will be left where they fall as a reminder to all others." Ven wanted to argue, but he saw the truth in those cold reptilian eyes. This was not a negotiation. This was a notification. The commander and his soldiers left to wait in the docking area, and Ven sat alone in his office trying to think of some legal technicality that might save the child. He could find nothing. Dominion's documents were legitimate under their own laws, and Korath 7's neutrality meant that it could not favor one stellar nation's laws over another. If the administrator tried to protect the child, the Dominion would have legal grounds to consider it an act of hostility. They could blockade the station, or even destroy it, and they would be within their rights under galactic law. Words spread through the station like fire through dry grass. Within 30 minutes, every human on Korath 7 knew that soldiers had come for Kamira was still working on the Palian engine when Sergeant Vasquez appeared in the doorway of her workshop. She had never seen the old soldier look so grim. His face was pale beneath his weathered brown skin, and his hands, which she had never seen tremble in all the years she had known him, were shaking at his sides. "Myra," he said, and his voice was rough with emotion. "You need to stop what you're doing, and you need to listen to me right now." She set down her tools and wiped her hands on a rag and looked at him with sudden fear growing in her chest. "What is it?" she asked. "What's wrong?" "Soldiers are here, and they've come for Cub, and they say she belongs to them, and they're going to take her in 2 hours. Mira felt the world tilt around her, as if the station's gravity had suddenly shifted. For a moment she could not breathe, and she could not think, and she could only stand there, feeling as if the floor had disappeared beneath her feet. And something changed inside her. Something that had been sleeping for a long time woke up and stretched and opened its eyes. It was not fear. It was something much older and much more dangerous. It was the feeling that every human knows in their bones when someone threatens something they love. "Where is she?" Myra asked, and her voice was very quiet and very calm. "Maria Reyes picked her up from school, and they're in the Reyes apartment now. And the kids are scared. Myra and Maria is scared, and everyone is scared." Myra nodded slowly, and she looked down at her grease-stained hands. And she thought about all the things those hands had fixed over the years: broken engines and damaged circuits and shattered machinery. She had always been good at fixing things, but some things could not be fixed with tools, and some problems could not be solved by following the rules. "Call everyone," she said finally. "Call every human on this station and anyone else who will listen, and tell them to meet me on deck 14 in 1 hour." "What are we going to do?" Vasquez asked. Myra looked at him, and he saw something in her eyes that he recognized from his years as a soldier. He saw the look of someone who had made a decision that could not be unmade. "We're going to show these soldiers something they've never seen before," Myra said. "We're going to show them what happens when they try to take one of our children." Vasquez nodded slowly, and he felt something stir in his own heart. He had spent so many years running from violence and trying to forget the things he had done in the wars of his youth, but this was different. This was not about conquest or territory or politics. This was about a little girl with golden fur and amber eyes who called him Uncle Vasquez and laughed at his jokes and made him feel like maybe his life had meaning after all. "I'll make the calls," he said. "Amira, I want you to know that whatever happens, I'm with you until the end." She reached out and squeezed his hand, and for just a moment they stood there together. Two humans far from home, facing something terrifying. Then they went to work. Clock was ticking, and they had less than 2 hours to do the impossible. Commander Sithrak led his 30 soldiers through the corridors of Korath 7. Exactly 2 hours after he had delivered his ultimatum to the station administrator, he walked with the steady pace of someone who expected no resistance and no surprises. Cathari had done this many times before on many different worlds. They would arrive, and they would make their demands, and the weaker species would bow their heads and comply, because that was the natural order of things. The strong took what they wanted, and the weak gave way. It had always been so, and it would always be so. First sign that something was different came when they reached the junction that led to Deck 14. The corridor ahead was blocked, not by a barricade or a security force or any kind of weapon. It was blocked by humans. They stood shoulder to shoulder across the full width of the corridor, and they filled it from wall to wall like a living wall of flesh and bone. Sithrak stopped, and his soldiers halted behind him in perfect formation. He studied the humans before him with cold, analytical eyes. There were perhaps 50 of them in this first group, and they were the most unthreatening collection of beings he had ever seen. He saw mechanics with grease on their clothes and merchants in worn civilian garments. He saw an old man leaning on a cane and a woman in a medical coat with a stethoscope around her neck. Saw children clutching their parents' hands and elderly people who looked like they could barely stand. Not one of them carried a weapon. Not one of them wore armor or any kind of protective gear. They were soft and fragile and utterly defenseless. "Move aside," Sithrak commanded, and his voice echoed off the metal walls. No one moved. The humans simply stood there, looking at him with expressions that ranged from terrified to defiant, but all of them united by something he could not quite identify. "This is your only warning," Sithrak said. "We are here on lawful business, and interference with Dominion operations is a capital offense punishable by immediate execution, and if you do not clear this corridor, my soldiers will open fire." Still no one moved. A woman stepped forward from the crowd, and Sithrak recognized her type immediately. She was small and unremarkable, with dark hair and the calloused hands of a manual laborer. She looked like nothing at all, and yet somehow the other humans seemed to orient themselves around her, as if she were the center of gravity in the corridor. "Her name is Cub," the woman said, and her voice was steady despite the fear that Sithrak could smell on her. "She is 6 years old, and she likes strawberry pudding and stories about dragons, and she is afraid of loud noises because she remembers the attack that killed her parents." Sithrak felt a flicker of irritation at this pointless information. "The child's preferences are irrelevant," he said. She is legally designated property of the Kethari Dominion, and she will be collected and processed according to established protocols. She's not property, the woman said. She's a child, and she's our child, and you're not taking her. Sithrak, second in command, leaned close and spoke quietly. Commander, we could push through easily, and these creatures pose no physical threat, and our weapons would cut through them like air. Then, why do you hesitate? Sithrak asked. The lieutenant was silent for a moment. Because they're not fighting, sir, and they're not running, and I don't understand what they're doing. Sithrak understood his confusion in all his years of conquest. He had seen many forms of resistance, had seen enemies fight with desperate fury until the last soldier fell. He had seen populations flee before his armies in blind panic. He had seen leaders negotiate and bargain and beg for mercy. But he had never seen this. He had never seen people who simply refused to move. Woman was still talking, and he forced himself to listen. You can shoot us, she said. You have the guns and we don't. And if you pull those triggers, a lot of us are going to die right here in this corridor. You understand your situation correctly, Sithrak said. So why do you remain? Because there's a little girl behind us who calls me Mom, the woman said. And there are a lot of parents in this crowd who would rather die than let a child be taken, and there are people who don't have children of their own, but who know that some things are more important than staying alive. Sithrak gestured at the corridor behind him. We have 30 trained soldiers with plasma rifles, and you have nothing, and you cannot win this confrontation. I know, the woman said, but you're going to have to kill us, and you're going to have to kill all of us. And then you're going to have to step over our bodies to get to her. That can be arranged. Maybe, she said. But every camera on this station is recording right now, and every communication channel is broadcasting. And by the time you fire your first shot, the whole galaxy is going to be watching. Sithrak felt a cold sensation in his stomach that he had not felt in many years. It was the sensation of a plan going wrong. He looked at the humans again, and he began to notice things he had missed before. He saw that more of them were arriving from side corridors and elevator shafts. The crowd was growing, and it was no longer just humans. A Italian shopkeeper had joined the line with his arms crossed over his chest. A Vreen engineer stood beside the old human man with the Kania Tellurian merchant family had brought their children and stood firmly in the middle of the blockade. But it was still the humans who formed the core of the resistance. It was the humans who had sent out the call and organized the response. It was the humans who stood at the front of the line facing his soldiers without weapons or armor or any hope of survival if he gave the order to fire. Why? Sithrak asked, and the question surprised him because he had not meant to speak it aloud. The woman looked at him, and he saw something in her eyes that he had never seen before. It was not hatred, and it was not fear. It was something else entirely. It was the absolute certainty of someone who has found something worth dying for. Because she's ours, the woman said. We found her, and we saved her, and we raised her, and we love her, and that makes her ours. She is not your species. That doesn't matter. She has no legal connection to you. That doesn't matter either. Then what does matter? Sithrak demanded. The woman smiled, and it was a strange smile, filled with sadness and determination and something that looked almost like pity. You really don't understand, do you? She said. You've conquered so many worlds and you've taken so many things, and you've never met anyone who would stand in your way like this. No, Sithrak admitted. I have not. That's because you've never tried to take a child from humans before. Behind her, the crowd pressed closer together. More were arriving every minute. The corridor was filling with bodies and faces, and the sound of breathing and the rustle of clothing. They were unarmed and unarmored and completely vulnerable. And they were not going to move. Sithrak looked at his soldiers, and he saw uncertainty in their eyes. For the first time, they were warriors trained for battle, and they knew how to kill enemies who fought back, but they did not know how to kill people who simply stood there and refused to run away. Commander, his lieutenant said quietly. "What are your orders?" Sithrak did not answer. He was still looking at the woman with the dark hair and the steady eyes. She was nothing special. She was just one small human among billions. But in that moment, she seemed larger than the corridor and larger than the station and larger than his whole army, because she had found something that his people had forgotten long ago. She had found something worth dying for. That made her more dangerous than any weapon in the galaxy. The standoff entered its third hour, and then its fourth, and then its fifth. The Cathari soldiers stood in formation with their weapons ready, and they did not move. The humans and their allies stood in the corridor with their bodies as their only shields, and they did not move either. Commander Sithrak had never experienced anything like this in all his years of service. He understood battle, and he understood victory, and he understood defeat. But he did not understand waiting. His lieutenant approached him again, with frustration evident in the set of his scales. "Commander, this is absurd, and we should simply push through and accept whatever casualties are necessary, and the mission parameters are clear." "And then what?" Sithrak asked. "What do you mean? After we kill them all, and after we take the child, and then what happens?" The lieutenant hesitates. Sithrak pointed at a small device mounted on the ceiling where the corridor met the junction. "Do you see that camera?" he said. "That camera is connected to the station's communication network, and that network is broadcasting to every corner of this sector and beyond." He gestured at the humans in the corridor. "These creatures have made us into a spectacle, and every minute we stand here doing nothing makes the Dominion look weak. But every minute we stand here, threatening unarmed civilians, makes us look like monsters. We are monsters," the lieutenant said. "That is our purpose, and that is our strength. Our purpose is to enforce the will of the Dominion." Sithrak corrected him. "And the will of the Dominion is to expand our empire, and to bring order to chaos, and to make other species serve our interests." "Exactly. But how do we expand an empire when everyone in the galaxy sees us slaughter children and their families for the crime of protecting an orphan?" The lieutenant had no answering. The corridor the humans were settling in for a long wait. Sithrak watched with grudging respect as they organized themselves with quiet efficiency. Someone had brought folding chairs for the elderly, and the infirm others were distributing water bottles and small packages of food. A group of children had started a quiet game in one corner, supervised by several adults who kept their eyes on the soldiers. Even as they watched the little ones, the humans rotated in shifts so that those who had been standing longest could rest, while fresh bodies took their places in the line. It was not a military operation, and there was nothing professional or strategic about it. It was simply people taking care of each other while facing something terrifying, and that Sithrak realized was what made it so powerful. These humans were not heroes, and they were not warriors, and they were not trained for confrontation. They were mechanics and shopkeepers and teachers and parents. They were ordinary people doing something extraordinary, simply because they could not bear to do nothing. In the fifth hour, Sithrak tried a different approach. He ordered one of his soldiers to fire a warning shot into the ceiling. The plasma bulb struck the metal panels above with a flash of light and a crack of sound that echoed through the corridor. Like thunder, humans screamed and flinched, and some fell to their knees with their hands over their ears. But when the sound faded and the smoke cleared, they were still there. No one had run. Woman who seemed to lead them was pale and shaking, but she stood her ground and looked at Sithrak with eyes that held no surrender. "You can do that all day if you want," she said, and her voice trembled, but did not break. "We're not leaving." In the sixth hour, news began arriving from beyond the station. The station's communication officer, a nervous young human named Peters, had been monitoring the broadcasts, and he came to deliver his report to Myra with barely contained excitement. "It's everywhere," he said. "Every human news network in this sector has picked up the story, and the feeds are showing crowds gathering at human embassies across the galaxy, demanding that their Governments do something. What about official responses? Mira asked. The Human Colonial Authority has issued a formal protest to the Dominion Embassy, and 3 human worlds have recalled their ambassadors for consultation, and there are reports of human cargo ships changing course toward Karth 7. Sithric overheard this exchange, and he felt the cold sensation in his stomach grow colder. This was supposed to be a simple collection operation: arrive and claim the property and leave instead. It had become an incident that threatened to damage the Dominion's reputation across the entire galaxy in the 7th hour. The first non-human voices began to join the chorus of protest. A Palian news anchor delivered an emotional commentary on the courage of the humans who stood against armed soldiers to protect the child. A Green political leader gave a speech calling the Dominion's actions a violation of basic decency. Even species who had no love for humans began to express sympathy for their cause, because everyone in the galaxy understood what it meant to protect the child. Everyone understood that some things were sacred, regardless of species or politics or lawing. The 8th hour Commander Sithrak received a communication from the Dominion diplomatic vessel that had been dispatched as soon as the situation became clear. A senior diplomat appeared on his screen with an expression of barely controlled fury. Commander, what exactly is happening at that station? Sithrak explained the situation as clearly as he could. The diplomat listened with growing horror. You're telling me that 30 armed Kethari soldiers have been held at bay by a group of unarmed humans for 8 hours. They will not move, and if we fire, the whole galaxy will see it and the political consequences. I am aware of the political consequences, the diplomat snapped. I have spent the last 4 hours receiving messages from every major power in the sector expressing concern about our intentions, and do you have any idea how much damage this is doing to our diplomatic position? Then give me orders, Sithrak said. Tell me what to do. The diplomat was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was tired and angry and defeated. Maintain position and do nothing, and I am coming to the station personally, and we will find a solution that does not involve massacring civilians on live broadcast. The connection ended. Sithrak looked at the corridor full of humans, and he felt something he had not felt in many years. He felt doubt. These creatures should have been easy to defeat. They had no weapons and no training, and no physical strength worth mentioning, but they had something else. They had each other. They had looked at a child who was not even their own species, and they had decided that she was worth protecting. They had looked at 30 armed soldiers, and they had decided that dying together was better than abandoning one small girl, and Sithrak was beginning to understand that this kind of strength could not be defeated with plasma rifles. In the 9th hour, a human child in the crowd fell asleep against her father's leg. The father simply adjusted his stance and stood there, unmoving, letting her rest against him like a small, warm weight. He'd been standing for 9 hours. His legs must have been burning with pain, but he did not move, and he did not complain, and he did not ask for relief, because he knew that somewhere behind him another father was protecting another child, and that was enough to keep him standing. Sithrak watched this small moment, and he thought about the Dominion and its armies and its conquered worlds. He thought about all the power they had accumulated over 3 centuries of expansion, and he wondered for the first time if they had lost something important along the way, something that these strange soft creatures still possessed, something that made them stand together when everything told them they should run. The Dominion diplomatic vessel docked at Karth 7 in the 10th hour of the standoff. Ambassador Krathvex was one of the most experienced diplomats in the Empire, and he had managed difficult situations on 100 worlds. But as he walked through the station corridors toward the confrontation, he knew that this situation was unlike anything he had ever faced. Had spent the journey reviewing the reports and watching the broadcasts and studying the faces of the humans who stood in that corridor. He had seen something in those faces that troubled him deeply. He had seen people who had already accepted that they might die, And he had seen that this acceptance had not weakened them, but had instead made them stronger than any army. When he reached the junction where Commander Sithrak waited, he paused to observe the scene with his own eyes. The corridor was packed with bodies. Now humans stood at the front with other species filling the ranks behind them. They had been there for 10 hours and they looked exhausted and frightened and determined. At the front of the crowd stood a small woman with dark hair who seemed to have aged years in a single night, but her eyes were clear and steady, and she met Krathvek's gaze without flinching. "You are the one they call Myra," the ambassador said. "I am," she said. "And you are the guardian of the child we have come to collect." "I'm her mother," Myra said. "And you're not taking her?" Krathvek studied her for a long moment. "Do you understand what you are doing?" he asked. "Do you understand that you are defying the Cathari Dominion and that we have destroyed worlds for lesser offenses?" "I understand perfectly," Myra said. "And I understand that you can kill every person in this corridor. And you still won't be able to take her without the whole galaxy seeing what you've done. The galaxy's opinion does not concern us." "Then why are you here?" Myra asked. "If you didn't care about what people think, you would have ordered your soldiers to shoot 10 hours ago, and instead you sent for a diplomat." Krathvek felt a flicker of respect despite himself. This human was smarter than she appeared. "What is it that you want?" he asked. "What would it take for you to step aside?" "I want you to leave my daughter alone," Myra said. "I want you to go back to your ship and fly away and never come back, and I want you to tell everyone in the Dominion that this child is not property, and she never will be. That is impossible, and the laws of the Dominion are clear, and debt is hereditary, and the child belongs to us. Then we have nothing to talk about," Myra said, and she turned her back on him and walked back into the crowd. Krathvek watched her go, and he felt the weight of the situation pressing down on him like a physical force. He had come here hoping to find some compromise that would allow the Dominion to claim the child without the terrible optics of a massacre, but he was beginning to understand that no such compromise existed. These humans would not negotiate. They would not surrender. They would only die. And if they died, the Dominion would win this small battle, but lose something much larger. He turned to Commander Sithrak, who had been watching the exchange in silence. "Commander, I need to speak with the Dominion Council immediately, and this situation has become larger than either of us can handle." The communication took 2 hours to arrange due to the distance involved. During that time, the humans in the corridor continued their vigil. Some of them prayed, some of them sang quiet songs, some of them simply held hands and waited. Cub herself had been kept far from the confrontation in a secure room deep in the human quarter, but word had reached her about what was happening, and why. Maria Reyes had tried to explain it gently, but the child was smart enough to understand. "They're going to get hurt because of me," Cub said, and her amber eyes were filled with tears. "They're standing up for you because they love you," Maria told her, "and that's what family does. But I don't want them to get hurt." "I know, sweetheart, and they know that too, and that's not why they're doing it." "Then why?" Maria knelt down and took the child's small four-armed body in her embrace. "Because you're one of us," she said, "and we don't leave our own behind, no matter what." In the corridor, the word came down from the Dominion Council after a long and furious debate. Ambassador Krathvek received the message and read it twice to make sure he understood. Then he walked to the front of the line where Commander Sithrak waited with his soldiers. "Stand down," he said quietly. Sithrak stared at him. "Ambassador, the Council has reviewed the situation, and they have determined that the documentation regarding the child contains significant irregularities, and the debt claim against her parents has been found to be based on fraudulent records, and the child is therefore not Dominion property. Everyone knew it was a lie. The documents had been perfectly legitimate, but the Council had looked at the broadcasts showing unarmed humans facing Dominion rifles, and they had calculated the cost of being seen as the empire that massacred Families to collect the 6-year-old cost was too high. Soldiers would withdraw, the child would remain. Myra heard the announcement, and for a moment she could not breathe. Then, the crowd around her erupted in cheers and tears and embraces. People who had been strangers 10 hours ago held each other like family. The tension that had held them upright for so long finally released, and many of them simply collapsed where they stood sobbing. With Relief Commander Sithrak ordered his soldiers to formation and began the march back to their ship. As he passed Mira, he stopped and looked at her one last time. "This changes nothing," he said. "Your species is still weak, and you still fight among yourselves constantly, and you have no great fleet or empire." Myra looked at him with exhaustion and triumph in her eyes. "You're right," she said. "We're not powerful the way you are, and we don't have the biggest guns or the strongest ships. Then how do you explain what happened here today?" Myra turned and looked at the crowd behind her. She saw humans and aliens embracing each other. She saw children being lifted onto shoulders. She saw old Sergeant Vasquez sitting on the floor with tears streaming down his weathered face. "There are lines we don't cross," she said. "Things that remind us we're all part of the same family, even when we forget it most of the time." "And what lines are those?" "Threaten our children," Mira said, and her voice was soft but carried clearly in the corridor. "Threaten any child we've decided is ours, and you'll find out exactly what humans are capable of." Sithrak nodded slowly. "I will include that in my report," he said. "I will recommend that the Dominion not test your species again." He turned and walked away, and his soldiers followed, and within an hour, the Dominion cruiser had undocked and disappeared into the Void 6. Months later, the paperwork finally cleared through 3 different legal systems. Mira Chen became officially and legally the mother of a Velith child named Cub. The adoption ceremony was held in the main plaza of Deck 14, with every human on the station in attendance, and quite a few aliens as well. Cub wore a new dress that Dr. Okonkwo had ordered specially from Earth, and she held Myra's hand throughout the ceremony with all 4 of her arms. When the official pronounced them mother and daughter, the crowd cheered so loudly that people 3 decks away complained about the noise. That night, Mira put Cub to bed in their small apartment, and she sat beside her until the child fell asleep. "Mommy," Cub murmured as she drifted off. "Are the bad soldiers going to come back?" "No, sweetheart," Myra said. "They're not coming back." "How do you know?" Myra stroked the soft golden fur on the child's head and smiled. "Because they learned something important," she said. "They learned that you're not alone, and you never will be." Cub's amber eyes closed, and her breathing slowed, and she slept peacefully for the first time in months. Myra sat in the darkness and listened to her daughter breathe. And she thought about the strange journey that had brought her here. She had come to the frontier running from a life that felt too small. She had found something larger than she ever imagined. She had found a family that extended beyond blood and species. She had found a reason to stand when everything told her to run, and she had learned the truth that humans had always known, but sometimes forgot, that the bonds we choose are stronger than the ones we're born with, that love makes us brave in ways we never expected, and that when humans close ranks around something precious, there is no force in the galaxy that can make them let go.